This episode of the Profit Express is brought to you by Corbett Public Relations, promoting and protecting businesses and brands for over 30 years. And you can visit them at corbettpr.com. That's CORBETTPR.com. Well, hello and welcome to the Profit Express. I am Tim Healy, and today's guest is a special guest to have on, especially for the timing as we kick off a new year in 2021, and especially as we continue to navigate our way through the pandemic that is COVID-19. Now, if you're a fan of the show, his name will certainly ring a bell. It's Joseph Michelli, New York Times bestselling author. And I actually had him on the show last year, and we spoke about his book, The Airbnb Way, which was a great read. Highly recommend it. He did a great job at showing how Airbnb completely revolutionized the hotel industry. Now, today, Joseph is back, and he's talking about his brand new book, Stronger Through Adversity. Now, this is a kind of book, and you'll understand shortly why I say this, that really needed to be released 6 months before COVID hit our shores and wreaked chaos and havoc, personally, professionally, for our country and for the world. So we needed it 6 months ago, 6 months before the pandemic. But unfortunately, this is the kind of book that needed to have COVID in order to be written. So it started out as a series of articles that Joseph was reaching out to his clients and former subjects of his books. Again, he's written books for Airbnb, Mercedes-Benz, Starbucks, to name a few. As he reached out and had conversations with how these leaders who were dealing with COVID, these conversations and supposed articles really turned into a book, and that is Stronger Through Adversity, which is the topic of today's book. And one of the things that he found very interesting, and we'll certainly delve into that, is how a crisis like the pandemic, like COVID-19, really put a test to what were the traditional methods of leadership and management that so many of us have lived by and worked by for so many years. So it's a great pleasure to have back on the Profit Express Joseph Michelli. How are you today, Joseph?
I am awesome. Thanks for having me, Tim. It's great to be here.
Well, again, thank you for being here, for sharing some time with the listeners. Again, I did want to plug Airbnb, The Airbnb Way. Great book. I really enjoyed that one. And it's funny, compared to this one, that was a lighthearted read, a very, very interesting read. And now we get to, if I can do a screenshot here without the glare, Stronger Through Adversity. So let me just start with that. The story, as I mentioned, you were just doing some articles and reaching out to your vast network of clients. How did it evolve? How do we now have a book today that we're speaking about?
So I had, I don't know about you, I had a slightly different plan for 2020 than it turned out. Probably December, about this time a year ago, I was planning to do a book about Godiva in follow-up to the Airbnb book. I've been a consultant for Godiva Chocolate for years. I was helping them with their retail experience and how do you create a compelling experience when you're selling chocolate in a mall and they're selling your same chocolate over at Macy's for 40% off in the friends and family rate. So I've been working with them, and we're planning the book for 2020 on them. I had a contract with McGraw-Hill and also, a collaboration agreement with Godiva. And then February, that famous phrase that I hadn't heard so much before, the abundance of caution phrase came out. And with an abundance of caution, I wasn't going to be able to make the tour of the factory in Pennsylvania. I wasn't going to be able to go to some of the new retail cafes in New York City. So that book got put on hold. And I was suddenly on all these task forces. People were like, help us keep our customers, help us decide what to do. So I was on all these crisis task forces, and I was watching leaders, and some were not getting anywhere. They were still following participatory management, right? We had to get everybody's voice in the room before we could make decisions. Right. Other people were flying by the seat of their pants. They had no data. They didn't seem to care about data. They just had impulses.
Right.
So somewhere in there, I start saying, we better figure out what's working and what's not. And I was calling some of my colleagues, and they called colleagues. And before you know it, 140 interviews later, we're we're here with a book before the year ended.
We have a book now. I do remember, Joseph, on our interview last year, you teased the Godiva book, and I was really looking forward to it. That'll have to wait. I'm sure it's still in the works, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's paused till next year for now, and it'll be our 5th anniversary. So maybe we'll all get 95 pieces of chocolate.
It could be great timing.
Exactly.
So early on in the book, I don't know if it was the first or second chapter, the topic of the chapter actually surprised me a little bit myself, and you talked about self-care for leaders. That was a very interesting choice, I thought. Why did you start off the book with that topic?
So Stacy Salvi works for Fitbit. She's an executive at Fitbit. And when I was talking with her, she said, I work for a company that monitors people's activity. And here I am on Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call. And my Fitbit is telling me to get up and walk and breathe. Here I am, work for a company, and I need my own device to just do the very thing because I'm so worried about, will our Fitbits be able to track COVID, and will we be able to do these things in partnership with Stanford University? So much pressure on the line. And hers was an easy story. Take somebody like Stephanie Linnartz from Marriott, where they're facing Mondo layoffs as a result of this. And so what you saw was leaders become transfixed with the importance that was on them, working 20 hours a day, convincing themselves that self-care was selfish. They had to be able to take care of their teams, and not getting, which is, I think, the principal's name, that they had to put their mask on first, not the controversial face covering mask, but the oxygen mask that we heard when we used to fly.
Right.
We have to take care of ourselves in order to help other people. And I think that was not obvious at first. And I talked to many leaders who were not sleeping, who were not eating, were not moving. And so it was just an important reminder that if we're going to endure any kind of crisis, we have to make sure that our oxygen mask is on.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. It's a great analogy. We've all heard, the airline, put the mask on yourself first. And it's a little later on in the book, but as you tell the story about how leaders really need to take time for self-care, there was a very interesting point in the book that talks about how employees, not just the leaders, but employees had a real sense of needing, especially as they work remotely, to have a sense of making their job relevant and mean something, so they could, avoid the being furloughed or let go, and talk about that level of pressure on the employee end, not wanting to be a casualty and prove to the bottom line, prove to your boss that your job was meaningful.
Yeah, essential. You want to be an essential worker, not an optional worker, right? And it was fascinating because I think there were several lessons there, right? One is that as leaders, if we overwork and kill ourselves in the process, we send a message to our teams that they need to do the same. So we set a cultural tone. The other piece there that I think you get into really thoughtfully is that sometimes two departments would be trying to say, our department is more important than your department. And if my people are overworking, will I look the other way? Because I'm getting more productivity, and that more productivity will make us rise above the other department. And so so one of the leadership things was not only take care of yourself and set a good example, but you kind of had to ride roughshod a little bit on your people to make sure that that extra productivity that may seem good over the short term is not something you want to encourage if this is a marathon and not a sprint. And if in general, you truly care about your people, because they are not resources that you can deplete. They have to be revitalized.
That's a good point. Now, by the very nature of leaders, whether it's, C-suite executives, business owners, to get to those ranks in business is typically accompanied by ego. I can speak for myself. I certainly have quite an ego. I think a lot of us do. It's in the personality. It's in our DNA.
Thank God I don't. That's all I can say. I'm just really glad I do not.
No, I heard you don't. That's one of your superpowers. That's great. So again, many owners and executives have that ego, but let's talk about it. One of the things that you explored in the book is, you have the ego, which is great, but remember, we're not an island, especially in something that nobody has experienced before. Again, the last time it happened was 100 years ago. So this is new to everybody. So, what did you encounter in your conversations with executives and owners as far as how they had to kind of check their ego throughout this?
Oh, I love this question because yes, there is healthy ego. Absent ego, you probably wouldn't get up in the morning because you don't even really believe you're capable. But ego is good. The problem is it has to be tempered by reality, right? So the reality piece here is that yes, be confident, be ambitious, be audacious, but also be informed and don't go it alone because this is not something you can master alone. So a really classic example is a guy who was the CEO of St. Michel Winery in Woodinville, Washington, which is just outside of Seattle. And he was invited to be part of something called Challenge Seattle by former governor of Washington, Christine Gregoire. And she invited him along with a few other people from Seattle, like the leaders of Starbucks and Nordstrom's and Microsoft and Boeing. And wow, suddenly you had all these people coming together in this community. And so as Starbucks was facing some of the early indicators of this in China, this little winery, not so little, but regional winery
Right.
is learning about things that they couldn't because they don't have an operation in China. And so it anticipated what they were going to do in their tasting rooms in Woodinville and other parts of Washington. So my point here is I think if we don't humble ourselves to reach out to others, we'll never get those preview insights that someone else has. We'll also feel pretty dang alone. And in leadership way, you talk to CEOs, and one of the things they'll tell you is all the easy decisions have already been taken. It's only the hard ones left to rise to that level. If you don't have some other people who maybe face some of those hard decisions,
Right.
it just seems like a very stressful place to be.
Yeah, and it's funny because obviously, as everybody knows, COVID has hit, in so many different ways, emotionally, mentally, physically, economically, of course. And as I read through the book, and again, today's guest, Joseph Michelli, talking about his brand new book, Stronger Through Adversity. And even as I was, everybody thinks, we're all living this day by day. But as you're going through certain examples, I was even amazed at things I hadn't considered that people are going through. Some of those I like to touch on later. One thing that you had mentioned that is kind of like a classic management philosophy that businesses and executives could be on one side or the other. You mentioned two in particular. Bezos, who says he's the customer first kind of leader. Okay. And then the other side of that, the flip side, if you will, is Richard Branson, who's the employee first. Okay. Or I should say, how has COVID shifted thinking regarding, is it the employee that comes first? Is it the customer that comes first? And are we looking at it, or do we have to look at it differently now?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. Yes, and so Bezos is plotting to be the most customer centric company on earth, and Amazon's doing a pretty good job of plucking a lot of money out of a lot of customers' pockets, but delivering them something of value. And I think Sir Richard Branson has done an amazing job with Virgin to be able to take care of his people so well and created a great experience. You can't argue that one is right or wrong under normal operating circumstances.
Right.
However, I had people like John Gaynor, who I worked with when he was the CEO of International Dairy Queen, now on the board at Jack in the Box and Saya. And he said, look, it was really easy for him. He'd been a centrist his whole life on that issue. He didn't take one side or the other. But now you had to take care of your people. Never before had organizations relied on people to keep them afloat when commerce could kill their people. And so suddenly the only way you could keep your door open and even have a remote chance of having any customers was if people were willing to give an incredible amount of discretionary effort to make it be so. And so I think this was a time, and in the book, I frame it as practice, employee obsession. And obviously I take the obsessive word without the psychiatric disorder sort of elements of it, and more about just the constant focus on the well-being of. And so if you take that and you say, we're going to really constantly be focused on the well-being of our employees, because if not for them, there is no There's no profits, no customers, no other good things to come. That was the transition I saw happen among leaders who were otherwise not so inclined to pick a favorite in that race.
So now, again, with all your experience as a consultant, as a New York Times bestselling author, that's what you had found in your interviews and your many, many conversations. Has it altered how you have seen that, point of view, rather?
Yeah, I think it has. The question is, will it last, right? To me, it's a bigger question about so many behaviors. Like, I remember when this first happened, I started getting emails from people I must have done business with 20 years ago that had me in their email list, but hadn't had the time of day for me. But all of a sudden, they're sending me out these emails that said, just checking in on how you're doing. That was a really short-lived effort at their own survival in the name of interest in me.
Right.
I think you're going to have some of that same risk now that, yes, we really cared about you as an employee when we were desperate. Will we care about you as much when we're not? And so, I definitely saw the shift. The question about a lot of this is, how transient will this shift be?
Will it last? Exactly. Yeah. Now, part of what I really enjoy about your writing style and your books is, they're based heavily on anecdotes and stories. And certainly stories are great to be able to connect emotionally. And, a lot of my listeners, the people reading your books, they could be executives at huge Fortune 500 and entrepreneurs, one-off consultants, solo entrepreneurs, if you will. One story that I was kind of impressed with, and I'm not always a big fan of, telecom and all those giants, but I believe the name is Hans Vestberg.
Yeah.
He's the CEO of Verizon. And they have 135,000 employees, if I got that right. So for a lot of, small business owners, you can't even fathom that number, obviously. You might have 10 or 20 or 100. And when you talk about obsession earlier in the non-crazy way, in the healthy way, tell the story and tell Hans's approach as to how his obsession for his employees paid off. Again, how he balanced 135,000 employees with a critical service, allowing people to be able to communicate, still have access to internet, etc. So what did he do in particular? I thought it was very interesting.
Well, he's a bold guy. Hans Vestberg is the CEO of Verizon, in case you want to just give him this appropriate title. And he really was clear with the street, in terms of your return on investment. We're not going for growth. We're going, organically, good things were happening to them because we were so reliant on telecommunications. But that notwithstanding, he was going to make decisions that include very generous, leave absence policies for his team members, for their physical safety, their well-being, if they weren't comfortable coming into work, all of that, and extra benefits if you had tested positive, if you needed extra time off, just a plethora of benefits that were associated with assuring that people didn't come to work unless they were healthy, and that if they weren't healthy, they were taken care of. And he was bold about it and brazen, and pretty much told the street, expect little right now because I'm taking care of my people. His popularity shot up, not only by his own internal, employee metrics, but all of those people who look at sentiment in social media and what was written about these, and they calculate where CEOs rank in terms of popularity. And he was like in the top 10, maybe I think it was number 4. Telecom never has CEOs that show up in the top 4 of popularity. So I think the point here is that he was brazen and he took care of his people and he put muscle behind it. And God knows they had a kind of an easier way of going, if you think about it, because they were not going to be in the Marriott situation. But, Arnie Sorensen did pretty much the same. He couldn't protect his people in terms of furloughs, but did a lot of the same kind of benefit packaging that he could. And I just think it was the time when you saw people show compassion as CEOs.
Now, again, and that's why I want to bring up, the Verizon example, because I didn't want to look at it cynically. And as I'm reading this, I'm like, wow. I mean, it was an abundance of offering security, if you will, to his employees, which is pretty amazing. And again, I still don't want to be cynical, but if you take it down to the level of a lot of the listeners being the small business owner or executive, obviously Verizon has resources that most companies just do not have. So resources allow you to make different decisions. All right, I think we can all agree to that. So then how would you, if you have somebody listening, they're like, God, I would love to be able to do what Vestberg did, but I just can't. Whether it's the resources or a different industry, because different industries were hit harder. How would you help a listener, a business owner, get comfort with the decisions that they're able to make and not able to make, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think most business leaders are already very in pain about these decisions. These were big moral decisions that they had to make. I think the key difference here is just if you can't protect your people in that way, then what can you do? And you just don't give up just because you can't do that, right? And so let me give you an example. I think that if you have to furlough people, then you still have the opportunity to help them understand how do they get unemployment? What does that look like? And play a role in helping them. You can't keep them, but you can certainly help them as they have to make that adjustment. You can continue to keep them in communication with, if you have coping tools that you're giving to your own people who are still around, you can still give them access to those coping tools. The point was that there are things you can't do, but what is it that you can? And I think that you saw more and more leaders trying to find ways to demonstrate behaviorally that they care, not just platitudinally saying things like, you're our number one priority, right? Show me anything you can do. If it's not financial, what kind of emotional support can you provide, or practical support can you provide?
Right. And you're listening to the Profit Express. Today's guest, he's back on the show, Joseph Michelli, New York Times bestselling author. His latest book, Stronger Through Adversity. And it's a compilation of 140 interviews, if you will, of business leaders around the globe, non-for-profit and for-profit, in a whole host of different industries. And as I said in my intro, man, it would have been a great book to have 6 months before this COVID thing hit. But unfortunately, it's a book that you couldn't write without COVID. Now, communication is something that has been in your books, in your past books, in various ways. And communication is key in management and leadership. I have a few points I really want to kind of dig down on you with communication here. But one that I thought, an approach that you discussed that I thought was very interesting, like, listening is key, right? It's a communication buzzword, right? And I'm not belittling it by any stretch. But one thing you mentioned, all of us dealt with, especially when it broke, levels of anxiety. Some of that anxiety could be crippling, and some of it could just be, maybe more on the surface, not as bad. But we all had it to some extent. Leaders, customers, employees. How does anxiety, and I think this would be a great insight for leaders listening so they can understand it. How does anxiety impact their ability to communicate as well as their employees who they're communicating to? Could you get into that for us?
Oh, wow. Where did that question come from? That's like, wow. All right, well, let me think. So one of the things I talk about in the book is Epictetus's comments, of ancient days, that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we can speak. And I think when you're in an emotional state, it does affect both how we communicate and how we hear. We're listening for the things that either fuel anxiety or reduce anxiety. We're listening because we're primed for resolution of that. So you have to be very careful about saying more than you know, because people want the gaps filled in to help them be able to get some semblance of control, some sense that they can move forward, but they don't want you to sell them on things that aren't true. And maybe for the short term, just like I like a lot of sugar, over the short term, it's kind of fun, but it kind of wears out on you when it doesn't really sustain you. So they're not looking for you to oversell hope, but they need hope. I often talk about it as an honest lullaby. They need you to say, if we work together, I have faith that by doing these things, we will come out on the other side. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be some real valleys before we pose a rally on this thing. And here are some of the things that we're facing and dealing with. And I want to be straight up with you, because in doing so, I trust you to work with us to make this great. If I didn't trust you, I would withhold this information. because I didn't think you were capable of managing it, which is anytime you challenge my trustworthiness, I am thus challenged to be trustable. So I think it's,
Right.
it's just an important conversation to realize these, and the things you say in those moments are going to really stick in the brains of people, right? Those moments, they're charged and primed to remember the words you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's become such an interesting environment that we're all operating now on a daily basis. So again, I want to kind of stick on the topic of communication here for a bit. Listening, as I mentioned a little while ago, is a very popular corporate communication buzzword. And in doing what I do in sales coaching and consulting, it could be one of the most powerful tools if you know how to use it. Okay, and people I think underestimate its power.
What
You
were
made
you saying there? I was kidding.
One of you made a key distinction that I'd like you to talk about, and you didn't just say being present and actively listening, but you made the distinction of listening in formal and informal listening. So if you can define them and kind of share how leaders, how managers can incorporate that, I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so formal listening to me is we've created a listening post, and we are soliciting input, or we're getting input through that listening post that maybe we didn't even solicit. But and these are things like a comment card, or click here to give us your feedback, or a pulse survey, or a very detailed customer survey or employee engagement survey. These are formal methods that we do, that we say we're setting aside time to solicit input, outbound or inbound. And I saw a lot more of that happening during the pandemic. Pulse surveys were abounding. People were checking on, how do you have enough of your your PPE to handle the situations
Right.
you're asked to do? Are we cleaning sufficiently? How comfortable do you feel coming into the office? All of that stuff. And so that was really helpful. And at a consumer level, people like Natasha Hertzak from Warner Media, they were polling customers all the time about what streaming content do you want? How can we meet your needs now that you're home more? And they had to wrestle with some of the variability and where's the signal and the noise with all the anxiety. But they started to see trends and position their product offerings more in line with what people wanted. So that's formal. Informal is one of my favorite examples. A guy I worked with when I was at Mercedes, and was very involved with them in a 4-year journey of helping them transform their customer experience from 22nd on the JD Power to #1 on the JD Power. And his whole approach, Steve Cannon, former CEO of Mercedes, now in charge of Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, the Atlanta Falcons, PGA Superstore, and much more. He was literally saying to people, when we come on a Zoom call, could you just grab something from your house and that means something to you, and could you just share it with us before we start getting into business?
Right.
Or many times you just say, let's just have a CEO lunch, and we're not going to talk work at all. I have to take lunch anyway. Why don't we just invite a bunch of y'all and join me, and then bring your thing and let's share it. And they were sharing their pets, they had their kids, they had wedding pictures, whatever it is, right? And I think the beauty of that is I'm listening to what do you value? Right. And in the understanding of what you value, I can make some decisions about what we need to do as an organization. And if I know what you value, I know how to inspire you, encourage you, support you, get out of your way.
Right.
Yeah. And so to me, that's informal listening, just kind of taking those natural occurring moments to hear sometimes the feelings behind the words.
Well, that's really important, because I think leaders have probably gotten better at the formal listening of things, recently, because it's been a topic of many books, et cetera, over recent years. But it's the informal, which I think it kind of delves into, which is also popular, but in a much different way because of COVID, the being vulnerable and being transparent. Now, this is a very interesting time. It's one thing to talk about, hey, here's a picture of my favorite vacation spot, or, wedding picture, et cetera, which is fun. It just kind of humanizes it. But when you talk about vulnerability, you talk about transparency, because it's even something I've struggled with. I was not brought up that way. I kept a lot of things. Hey, I'm a radio show host. I'm a podcaster, a business consultant, and I just, whether it was my environment, family, etc., I was just, I don't share, and it's taken me years to kind of embrace that. So, is there a right way or a wrong way of doing that? Because people can smell when you're not genuine. And now, are we just asking leaders, hey, you got to be vulnerable and you got to be transparent. Here you go. How do we address that?
Well, I think there is a wrong way. That's to be overly disclosive and to not be disclosive. Those are the two wrong ways.
Okay.
The gray in the middle is very hard to figure out. So I give you all of that. And then there are the safe topics for disclosure, like the vacation thing. When I start talking about my fears, my anxieties, how far do I go into that before I start causing you to freak out because your leader is so seemingly anxious? But how do I not be, so strong that I'm invulnerable, because people smell that as, just a bunch of nothing. So,
right.
So it's an artful skill, but most of the great things of leadership are nuanced, right? It's not it's an easy decision, so anybody could do it. I mean, to be an effective leader is to have the balance of sharing of yourself to the point that it's helpful, but not sharing of yourself to the point where it creates distress or the spotlight's all on you. Look at me, I'm the leader. Let me tell you all about me, right? And that's a delicate balance. I don't think there's an easy way to do it. But the fact of the matter is, someone like you and I, because I share your same thing. I'm good in my persona, not quite as good as my vulnerable human. So I've got to try more of that. And I got to check in, did I do a little too much of that? Because that's my fear always, whenever I do any of it. I way overdid that. And I have to check in on it. And I have to check with the audience. And most of the time, I'm close enough, right? Some of the time a little too much, some of the time a little too little. It feels like three bears all of a sudden here. Sometimes I'm just right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and today's episode of The Profit Express is brought to you by Corbett Public Relations, promoting and protecting businesses and brands for over 30 years. And visit my good friends at Corbett PR at corbettpr.com. That's CORBETTPR.com.
Let me just jump on that, really. I know it's a advertiser, but I think that people in PR, and I talked to some, for example, in the context of the book, I think they are helping brands know the right amount of disclosure, the right words of vulnerability. So kudos to Corbett PR.
Well, no, well, thank you. And Bill is the owner and president of Corbett PR, and I've had him on a number of times. And that's certainly something, because again, it's the message. And I know you do talk about it, data hasn't been available. We're still searching for what's the right data, and it's okay if you don't know it to say it. And certainly PR can help us navigate through that. Now, if I can, though, I want to stay on the vulnerability for a moment. So we'll find out, Joseph, very quickly if I've gone too far. But hey, I'm the host, so let me have some fun with it. So COVID, again, has been very tough for a lot of people. And I really did not share a lot of things until pretty recently. And unfortunately, I lost my sister to COVID in June.
Oh, my gosh.
And I'm not trying to ruin a great interview.
No, I'll be able to go on. I mean, I've lost ones, but I am very sorry for your loss.
I appreciate it. And it happened in June, so I can talk about it. And it was remarkable because it was a tragic loss. And as I'm reading this book, it's bringing me back. As I'm reading your book, Stronger Through Adversity, it's bringing me back to what had happened in June. And I chose to write for the first time ever a blog article about my sister. And it was entitled, People Don't Come with Expiration Dates. I wish they did. And I was on LinkedIn, and it got by a multiple of 3 or 4, the most amount of comments and views and impressions. And I didn't, obviously that wasn't my goal. You know, I put it up there. It was cathartic. It made me feel great.
It helped others, I'm sure. I mean,
And it did.
because I mean, just in the heading,
Yeah.
I must admit I haven't seen it, but I will now. Believe me. The I think just the title implies that if only we knew, right? Like, if we
Yeah.
could have known, how might we have done things differently? And that'll help a lot of people. It really will.
It created a lot of conversations. I debated it for a little while. I reached out to some friends, you know, colleagues. They encouraged me to do it, and I thought it was great. And I'm 100% glad I did it. But I want to share it with you, share it with the audience today, because I think it's a powerful tool, and I think it helps, you know, leaders, employees be able to relate. So, but anyhow, I want to share that with
You
you.
know, and if I can just follow up for just one more second on it, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that if you had written it, right, and you'd have said, look at me, look at my suffering, look at my woe, please pity me, right?
Yeah.
Then it would have been over disclosure in a way that you probably should have talked to your therapist about if you had one. If you wrote it to partly deal with that, to
Yeah.
share a part of yourself, to be vulnerable so that others could benefit, which is what the intention sounds like, and it's certainly how it's landing.
Yeah.
That's great leadership. And I think that, you know, just to follow up on the point you were making before we went into this, was that's the art, right? Is figuring
Yeah.
out what is my intention, and how do I execute against my intention to affect positive outcomes. That's what communication should be about. And so as a leader, that's what we have to do. And it requires us to share our part of our humanity some of the time, because people don't follow perfect leaders. They don't follow people with perfect lives who've got it all together, who never are vulnerable. That's not very interesting to follow.
It's true because, you know, again, for me, I think I went in it with I know I went in with the right intention. And I think at the end of the day, if the leader goes in it with the right intention, people will sense that. And I almost don't think you can go wrong if the intention is right. So
I love that. That's exactly right. Yeah, and we can
Yeah.
still execute against the intention better over time as we learn our skills.
Right.
Intention is all of it.
Right.
Being real honest about your intention. And that, you know, one of the things that in the communication realm, Linda Rutherford from Southwest Airlines really was helpful. She's the chief communication officer for Southwest, and she's in Stronger Through Adversity. And she said to me something that, you know, she goes, a lot of people are going to tell you, Joseph, that you can't over communicate in crisis. And she said, don't believe it. You know, you can over communicate, just like over disclose, right? That's an over communication. You don't want to do that. You got to be reasonable. It's not all about you. You can also just send out so many messages in a time of clutter that, like, why are you talking? If you have nothing to say, maybe you shouldn't say it, other than to say, I don't have anything to say right now, and I'll come back to you when I do, right? So she was really clear about aligned, intentional, purposeful, and to use your point, to have that intention. That kind of communication is what we need to do as leaders.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. One story I wanted to touch on was I did not know of him. It was part of the original. I think you referred to it as a triumvirate at Starbucks, which is one of your books you'd written on Starbucks.
Oh, you got to have him on, Tim. Howard Behar. You got to have him.
I would love to.
He's one of the greatest interviews on live stream. I have a live stream with Howard that I did.
Yeah,
just amazing. He's true.
Now I got to check that out. Yeah, I would love to talk to him. And so for those who don't know, of course, most are familiar with Howard Schultz, of course, the founder. And there was three. I don't know the third's name. I apologize.
Yeah, Orrin Smith. So
Orrin.
it's 820.
Right.
Two Howards and an Orrin.
There you go. And Howard Behar was one of the original key executives at Starbucks. And this one blew me away. And I'm just going to set it up and I'll let you take it from there. So before his Starbucks days, he was an executive at a company. And they had to go through a round of layoffs. And what happened was people found out about it who was on the list before it was announced. And it blew up, obviously. And he talked, you know, all these executives had all these grandiose ideas as to how do we get the egg off of our face. And I believe it was an assistant who said the phrase, and I absolutely loved it. Only the truth sounds like the truth.
Yeah, everything else sounds like spin. Right? And it's brilliant. And to this day, it's like his mantra. He has got that on a sign in his office, well long retired from his days as president of
Yeah.
Starbucks International. And yeah, he's the real deal. He's got so many of those kind of lines. You truly would love it. It's like the guy who pushes the broom should be the one who buys the broom, right? Or chooses the broom. I mean, he's got all those kind of tidbits of wisdom, but nothing sounds or smells like the truth. And that became a mantra that he continued to coach people on throughout the pandemic. One guy who really benefited from it was the head of FTD. The guy was actually hired, the CEO of FTD was hired during the pandemic, and
Right.
his first day on the job, they had closed the offices like 3 days before. And so his leadership team didn't know him from anyone. And his whole message was, no hiding bad news. That was all he said. I said, you don't know me, you don't know how I'm going to behave, but if you could just follow one mantra, never hide bad news. And they had some bad news early on. They didn't get all their deliveries out for the first Mother's Day or whatever, but they worked through it, and FTD's on the rebound.
Well, maybe you can't answer this question, but it seems there's an awareness at this point, even before COVID. Why do executives, why do they still try to massage and manipulate and I don't say BS it, but in a way they really are? Because people find it out. I mean, it's not long. Maybe it's a day or two, but the truth will surface. Why do somebody has so much exposure to executives and businesses, why do people still do it?
I think we do have an imposter syndrome. We thought if people really knew the truth about us and the nuances, they'd never be leaders, right? So if we can tamp down as much of the things that demonstrate how different we are from the image we project and our portrayed competence versus our incompetence, I think that's really a psychological variable that's at play. And particularly the bigger your ego gets to go to to kind of a point about ego. I think if you get to a point where you think you're better than other people, everything that proves you're not really gets in your way. And so you try to hide those things. I am not better than you, Tim. Tim, you're not better than me.
Right.
In the human condition, trying to do our dangest.
Right.
The more we own that, the more I can show you my vulnerabilities, you can show me yours. We probably can work together effectively.
Right.
And we probably can produce superhuman things together. But a lot of leaders don't think that way.
Unfortunately. Again, today's guest, you're listening in the conversation, myself and Joseph Michelli, New York Times bestselling author. His book today, Stronger Through Adversity. Again, it was a book we all could have used 6 months before COVID hit, but the book couldn't have been written without COVID.
Dang it,
unfortunately.
Jim, stop saying that. It was hard to get the thing out.
Well, no, it's not a negative. It's just, wow. It's.
I've already got the next book about a pandemic written. So the next time they go through this, they can just look at this Stronger Through Adversity, and they're covered.
Hopefully be 100 years from now, right?
Yeah.
One thing that I guess more from the economics of this, I'd be interested to get your take, is obviously so many of us went to remote working and working out of our living rooms, our kitchens, our dens. And there's been massive cost savings. Okay. I mean, I've seen it in my business. My windshield time is a fraction, just time alone. So listen, what does corporate do when they see a great opportunity to save and to cut costs? They most likely take advantage of it. What do you think? Again, I'm asking you to look into the future. So we've had to embrace remote. Obviously, it's gone back in certain circumstances to a hybrid, some days in, some days out. What do you think will be the long-term effect of this just from practicality in a workplace situation?
Yeah, I think, Tim, you know the answer. It is a hybrid. It's going to be. And a lot of things are going to be hybrids. A lot of things are going to stick from the pandemic, things that people were reluctant to move to. There were businesses that wouldn't let anybody work from home because they were convinced there would be no productivity unless that person was sitting here. They were managing a location, not an outcome. A lot of that stuff's gone. I mean, that genie's out of the bottle. We don't need to stand in line to pay for things. We don't need to pull money out of our wallet to pay for things in a contactless world. We can pick things up at the curbside. All those things are going to stick, including a revision of the workplace model. Now, you're seeing some trend data. Gallup already has shown that, in the old days, getting to work from home was a perk. Now getting to work from home is a prison for some folks. And so figuring out that there are costs to this from a social isolation perspective and other things, absence of collisions in the workplace, breakdowns of the company culture because of too much detachment. So I think what you're going to see is a hybrid model. And I talked to CEOs in this book, Jeff Dail, who's the CEO of Farmers Insurance. I think they have about 30,000 people in about 6 different physical campuses. He's not going to have 6 at the end. He's clear. It's not going to be 6. It's going to be a reduction of the number of physical plants. Other leaders were building new buildings. They put a stop to, said, we don't need to build more office space in the future. So there's no doubt that those things are going to change.
So from your perspective, again, certain things will stick. There's a lot of conveniences that have evolved, services that have evolved, curbside pickup. I love it. What do you think is probably the best adaptation that you hope sticks, and then one that you really want to see us get back to how things used to be?
Well, and I think part of it is what we're doing right now. One of the great changes, I think, is that people no longer expect you to show up physically to have a meeting. Meeting has a limited focus and experience that doesn't require us to interact and negotiate. So I think you're going to see, I don't have to go to New York to do a meeting tomorrow kind of thing, where I would have. Maybe I would have gone for an hour meeting with Godiva, fly up from Tampa, spend an hour, go through all that travel hassle, come back tomorrow night. That's pretty typical in the pre-COVID age. I don't think I do that meeting. Now, if I'm going to do a weekend brainstorming session, I think that meeting is going to come back, and I can't wait for it to come back, because as much as I love this platform and I love collaboration tools, there is just sometimes you got to be in the same room with people, to look in their eyes, to hear their voice, to see their nonverbals, to not be on screen the whole time, right? To give yourself a bit of a break. And I think that's going to happen. I can't wait for it to come back.
Yeah. No, I definitely miss, as somebody who was, I was making rounds. I was having lunches, breakfast almost every day of the week. And for that to stop, cold turkey, that's been tough. It definitely has been
breakfasts have not been all that great for me. I mean, when I eat breakfast and other people are eating breakfast on Zoom, like, this isn't working.
It's so. I mean, we've tried our best. We've had virtual happy hours, and we try to get creative. But thankfully, we still crave, as human beings, that interaction, the embrace, the handshake, the hug, and so many of us can't wait to get back to that. My goodness.
Yeah.
So you spoke about, actually, this is interesting. I'd written a note on this one. You spoke about Jeff Dail, who is the CEO of Farmers, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
And by the way, how you keep all of these people in your head, you do a phenomenal job. The titles, the companies, I couldn't do that. So you do a great job keeping.
A lot of them I've worked with. Jeff is one that I've worked with, for example.
He's okay.
It's easy for me to remember him.
That one's easy. So one thing that he had mentioned in his book, there was the discussion that it was very likely that claims on auto insurance would go down because nobody was driving. Just, the actuaries were letting them know. It made sense. And he had made the decision, and somebody had offered the idea of, hey, why don't we do, a reduction in rates, premiums rather. How did he deal with that?
Well, yeah, he said to them, look, we've got a lot of stakeholders here, back to kind of the issue of who wins in this whole deal. We got a lot of stakeholders here, and I need to stockpile some money just to make sure that we're super flush. We're in really good shape, but I want to make sure of it. So if we recoup some of those premium without having to pay out because of car travel, then we're going to hold on to them. The next week, USAA came out and said, we're going to return premiums back to our insured. And, so that's one thing. And then he could have easily, and then he was a fast follower. Farmers immediately did the same.
Right.
Some insurance companies never actually did that.
Yeah.
But he was a fast follower, and he could have just left it at that, right? But he comes back out to his entire organization and he says, I want to let you know that these folks recommended that we do this before USAA did. I should have done it. It was my mistake. I was calculating a lot of things. That's not an excuse. We should have done it. I should have listened to our people. We should have been out front on this one. And now what came of that, interestingly enough, was their pulse surveys of their employees showed high rankings for him. And one number in particular is relevant. They calculate something called the ENPS. How likely are you to recommend Farmers Insurance to, say, a family or friend if they're looking for employment, right? Right. And boom, 27% increase, incredible jump after he did that. Now, did he do it to get that? No more than you wrote your article.
Yeah.
Sympathy, right? Like he did it for the right reason. And what do you get when you do the right thing for the right reason? The right response. And so, I don't know. He's one of those guys I absolutely admire. Very stoic guy.
Yeah.
But incredibly passionate about customers and team members.
Well, listen, I mean, you can look at it both ways. As a business owner, as the executive, as the CEO, nobody's going to blame him to say, hey, listen, let's keep cash on hand. Let's make sure we're fluid. Okay. Good business practices. Then he sees a shift in the marketplace. He sees a competitor going out, beating him to the punch. Okay. But then admitting to it at that level.
I made a mistake. Like, you don't even have to say that. You could have covered yourself saying, we had a lot of stakeholders and I had calculated it. And, at that time, that was the best decision. At this time, this is the best decision. I mean, we've heard it all. Yeah. But he said, no, I was wrong. I should have listened to my people. That statement's like, I don't know. Let's find out.
Right.
Those are big steps in 2020 in leadership that I hope stick around.
Well, it's refreshing to see Dail doing it, and then Vestberg at Verizon. There's hope. We don't want to have to be cynical with big corporate. This has been a great conversation as always with you, Joseph. I want to end with one that I think, for me, again, everybody reads a book. They interpret books freely, of course. And again, today's guest, Joseph Michelli, Stronger Through Adversity. It's a must read, helping all of us negotiate and navigate through COVID. There was a story with Chris Racinos, I believe I have the name right, founder or CEO of Nurse Network. I might be getting that wrong. I apologize. And of course, he's in charge of a nursing network.
It's a she, and it's Nurse Leader Network.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't catch that. My bad. So it's a nurse network, and of course, talk about frontline workers. The medical workers, the nurses. I can't even begin to fathom for a moment what they went through. Doing what I do. And the one story that you had shared, and how she, as the leader, had to help her people navigate, especially when, it all hit the fan in March. I mean, it was devastating. And we're up in New York when we saw it really firsthand, the first wave, if you will. And she told the story of how her employees, these nurses, had to be a surrogate family member for dying patients. And just saying the story, I'm getting choked up. And how they would use technology, FaceTime, whatever it was, to allow the dying patient's family see them in their last breaths, and how devastating that was for her employees, the nurses. That, to me, I just want to share it with you. I don't necessarily have a question, but I would love your comment or feedback on it. Really put it into perspective, just how monumental this has been for everybody, and what an amazing growth opportunity COVID has been, as horrible as it's been. Now is a great story.
Wow. Yeah, Chris is amazing. She has a PhD. She's in charge of a large healthcare center. She wasn't able to share it publicly, the name in the book, from just the rights associated with that. But she worked for a major hospital system in LA, and they're still getting slammed. What I love about the story on many different levels. So on one part of the story is just simply, we're all in the same storm, but different boats. And as hard as it was to ride in my boat, it's probably nothing like what she had to ride in hers. And she was a leader. in those times. And while I didn't have to ride in that boat, I could learn from her leadership. And so what can I learn from her? Well, there were many messages in that, in how she brought spiritual counseling, respite, all kinds of things. So she did things as a leader, actual actions to help her people. So sometimes we care for others as a leader by doing for. Sometimes we can't do for people, but we can listen. And listening is an act of caring and leadership. Sometimes it's beyond listening, and we can just be with them. We don't even, we just need to be physically present with them. And sometimes that's all we've got. And then sometimes we can affirm and offer hope. In this case, a lot of it was just being present and affirming. And, these are people who have their iPad like this, showing up to the face of a dying patient so that the family members can see them. And they're shaking and they're crying, and nurses. And these are nurses that come out of that room, and she has nothing she can do for them other than to be with them and to affirm the value of what they just did. I'm telling you, sometimes that's all we can do as leaders. We can't fix it for them. And so those are the kinds of lessons that Stronger Through Adversity has in them. And I am blessed to have had the privilege of talking to people like Chris Racinos.
Yeah, that's again, like I said, for me, that was a story that absolutely just drove it all home. Joseph, listen, I want to thank you again for coming back on the Prophet Express. Tremendous book, really tremendous book. I think it's a must read from the host opinion here. It's a must read. Stronger Through Adversity. You did a great job on it. I'm still waiting on Godiva though. Okay.
Yeah, well, we're both holding out on that one. Hey, Tim, I just want to say thank you. I do this for a long time. We've both done this for a long time. You're one of the premier interviewers out there. I looked forward to this interview. I'm so grateful for your disclosure, your willingness to share a part of yourself back. It helps us all become stronger through adversity in the years ahead. Your thoughts, and you'll be in my family's prayers as well, as we move into what I hope will be a better year. Maybe not in the first couple of months, but hopefully we'll be seeing the better of this as we move forward.
Thank you for the kind words. Of course, I appreciate that. And yeah, it's a great message. Thank you for sharing it. And here's to 2020. The bar 20. Here's to 2021. The bar was so low, we can only go up, right?
Absolutely.
But thanks again, Joseph. Really appreciate it. Great talk.
Thank you.